The night he almost quit forever. When football's greatest star nearly walks away. March 17th, 2004. Zinedine Zidane sat alone in his car outside Real Madrid's training ground at 2:30 a.m., holding his resignation letter. The greatest footballer of his generation had reached his breaking point. Fame, pressure, and betrayal had pushed him to the edge of walking away from everything he had ever loved. This is the story of the darkest night that almost stole football's brightest star. In the passenger seat lay a handwritten letter addressed to Florentino Perez. 3 pages of careful French script that would have ended not just a career, but an era. The man who made football look like art was ready to abandon his masterpiece forever. And nobody, not his family, not his teammates, not the millions who worshipped him, had any idea how close they came to losing him. The crisis had been building for months, a perfect storm of circumstances that would have broken anyone, but seemed especially cruel when inflicted on someone whose entire identity was built around grace under pressure. It began with the Galactico politics at Real Madrid, where Zidane found himself caught between club president Florentino Perez's commercial ambitions and coach Carlos Queiroz's tactical demands. Every decision was scrutinized, not for its football merit, but for its media value. Every match was a performance, not just for results, but for the cameras that followed his every move. I felt like an actor in a play I hadn't auditioned for, Zidane later reflected. Everyone expected me to be perfect, all the time, in every aspect of my life. I was suffocating under the weight of being Zinedine Zidane. But the final straw wasn't tactical disagreements or media pressure. It was betrayal by someone he trusted completely. David Beckham, his teammate and supposed friend, had been secretly briefing English journalists about Zidane's private struggles with form and confidence. Stories began appearing in the British press, detailing Zidane's training ground tantrums and dressing room confrontations. Stories that could only have come from someone with intimate access to Real Madrid's inner circle. When Zidane confronted Beckham about the leaks, the Englishman didn't deny them. Instead, he justified them as giving the media what they want, and suggested that Zidane was too sensitive about his privacy. In that moment, I realized I was completely alone, Zidane remembered. The person I had defended publicly, who I had helped settle into Spanish football, had been selling my vulnerabilities to the highest bidder. If I couldn't trust David, who could I trust? The betrayal shattered something fundamental in Zidane's worldview. He had always believed that excellence in football would be respected, that treating people with dignity would be reciprocated, that maintaining your integrity would protect you from the sport's darker elements. Suddenly, he found himself questioning everything. Was his entire career built on naivety? Were all his relationships transactional? Was he just a product to be consumed rather than a person to be respected? I started to hate the sight of a football, he admitted years later. Every training session felt like a performance for people who didn't really care about me. Every match felt like I was feeding a machine that would eventually devour me. On March 16th, 2004, Zidane called a family meeting. He gathered Veronique and their children around their kitchen table and told them what he had never told anyone. He wanted to quit football immediately. Not at the end of the season, not after one more tournament, not when his contract expired, immediately. "Papa, why?" asked his 9-year-old son Enzo. "You're the best player in the world." "Being the best isn't worth it if it makes you miserable," Zidane replied, the words surprising even himself with their honesty. Veronique, who had watched her husband's joy slowly drain away over the past year, supported whatever decision would bring him peace. But she also asked the question that would haunt him. If you quit now, will you regret it later? Or will you regret not quitting? That night, Zidane sat at his kitchen table and began writing his resignation letter to Real Madrid. Not a retirement announcement, a resignation. He wanted to make clear that he wasn't leaving because his body was failing, but because his spirit was broken. The letter went through 14 drafts. Each version became more brutal in its honesty about the toxicity he had experienced, the betrayals he had endured, and the complete loss of joy that had made football unbearable. Dear President Perez, the final version began. I am writing to inform you that I can no longer continue as a Real Madrid player, not because I cannot perform, but because I can no longer pretend to be happy performing. At 2:30 a.m., Zidane drove to Real Madrid's training ground with the intention of sliding his resignation letter under Perez's office door. He would quit before dawn, disappear before anyone could talk him out of it, and reclaim his life from the machine that was consuming it. He sat in his car for 2 hours, engine running, letter in hand, watching the empty training complex, where he had experienced both his greatest triumphs and deepest disappointments. I kept thinking about my father, he recalled, how he had worked night shifts for 30 years to give me the chance to play football. How could I throw away what he had sacrificed so much for? But then I thought, would he want me to be miserable just to honor his sacrifice? At 4:30 a.m., Zidane made an impulsive decision. Using his keycard, he entered the Santiago Bernabeu stadium and walked onto the pitch where he had created some of football's most magical moments. The stadium was completely empty, lit only by security lighting. He walked to the center circle, sat down on the perfectly manicured grass, and for the first time in years, allowed himself to cry. I cried for the joy I had lost, for the innocence that was gone, for the boy who had dreamed of playing in stadiums like this, and never imagined how lonely it could be when the dream came true, he remembered. As he sat in the center of the empty Bernabeu, Zidane heard footsteps. Night security guard Miguel Rodriguez, who had worked at the stadium for 20 years, had noticed the lights in the players' tunnel and come to investigate. Instead of asking what Zidane was doing there at 5 a.m., Miguel simply sat down beside him on the grass. Bad night? Miguel asked in Spanish. The worst, Zidane replied. They sat in silence for 10 minutes before Miguel spoke again. My son watches you play. Every match, he records it and watches it again the next day. He studies your touches, your movement, your decisions. Not because he thinks he'll become a professional. He knows he's not good enough, but because watching you makes him believe in beauty. Miguel continued. He doesn't know about your salary, your contracts, your problems with teammates. He doesn't care about the politics or the pressure. He just sees a man who can make a football do impossible things, and it gives him hope that impossible things are possible. The security guard paused, then added, maybe that boy and all the others like him need you more than Real Madrid does. Maybe the question isn't whether you can survive in this business, but whether football can survive without what you bring to it. Miguel stood up, patted Zidane on the shoulder, and walked away, leaving the footballer alone with new thoughts. As dawn broke over Madrid, Zidane remained sitting on the Bernabeu pitch, Miguel's words echoing in his mind. He began to understand that his crisis wasn't really about football. It was about allowing other people's dysfunction to poison his relationship with something he loved. The betrayals, the pressure, the politics, none of that was football. That was the business surrounding football. The actual football, the moment when his foot met the ball, when impossible became inevitable, when physics bent to artistry, that was still pure. I realized I had been confusing the disease with the patient, he reflected. Football wasn't sick. The people around football were sick. But that didn't mean I had to let their sickness infect me. At 6:45 a.m., Zidane walked back to his car, took out his resignation letter, and tore it into small pieces. Instead of ending his career, he would change how he approached it. He would stop trying to be the person everyone expected him to be, and start being the player he had always been. He would protect his joy by sharing it more selectively. He would trust fewer people, but love the game more deeply. I chose to save my relationship with football by ending my relationships with the people who were poisoning it, he explained. The near-quit experience transformed Zidane's approach to his career. He became more selective about media obligations, more direct in dealing with teammates, and more protective of his family's privacy. But most importantly, he rediscovered the joy that had almost been stolen from him. The 2004-05 season became one of his greatest, culminating in La Liga victory and individual performances that reminded the world why he was considered football's most complete artist. He played with a freedom that came from having faced the abyss and chosen to step back from the edge. Miguel Rodriguez never knew how close he came to saving football history. His simple words about hope and beauty had provided Zidane with the perspective needed to continue his career. Years later, when Zidane won his third Champions League as Real Madrid's coach, he found Miguel still working night security and personally gave him a signed jersey with the message, "To the man who taught me that football is bigger than footballers. Thank you for the most important lesson of my career." Zidane's near-quit experience influenced how he later managed players as a coach. He recognized the signs of spiritual exhaustion, the symptoms of joy-killing pressure, and made protecting his players' mental health a priority. "I never wanted any player under my management to experience what I experienced that night. Success means nothing if it costs you your soul." The night Zidane almost quit forever taught him that the greatest enemy of greatness isn't failure. It's the slow erosion of joy that comes from caring too much about things that don't matter and too little about the things that do. His crisis became his catalyst, his breakdown became his breakthrough, and his darkest hour became the foundation for some of his brightest moments. Every March 17th since 2004, Zidane has returned to the center circle of the Santiago Bernabéu at dawn, not to relive his crisis, but to remember the lesson it taught him, that the things we love most are worth fighting for, especially when the fight is against our own despair. The night he almost walked away became the night he truly arrived, not as a perfect player immune to suffering, but as a complete human being who had learned to protect what matters most. Football didn't just keep its greatest star that night. It gained a wiser one, shaped by darkness, but not bound by it, defined by it, tested by despair, but not destroyed by it. The resignation letter that was never delivered became the most important document in football history, not for what it said, but for what its destruction proved. That sometimes the most courageous thing you can do isn't walking away from what hurts you, but learning to love it more wisely.